Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. As my listeners who follow the news might know, here in the United States, we got our NAEP scores back, and students have not done particularly well in growing their math achievement or literacy for that matter. Obviously, we still need to do a lot of work on math and literacy and helping our students to not only master literacy, but master numeracy. It's a particular struggle in the United States. How are we going to get our students to develop fluency in numeracy? Tonight, we're going to talk about fluency in numeracy, getting our early learners through middle school students able to access math and approach math with confidence. With that in mind, I'm excited tonight to have the authors of the book, The SNAP Solution, an innovative math assessment tool for grades K-8, talking with us about how we can be presenting and teaching math in a different way. So tonight, I'm being joined by Kirk Savage. Kirk is Assistant Superintendent of Chilliwack School District in British Columbia. We're also being joined by Jonathan Ferris, who is a Field Placement Coordinator at the University of Fraser Valley. And we're being joined by a return guest to the Have a Life Teaching podcast, and that's Tom Hierck, consultant, former school and district administrator, also in British Columbia, Canada. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity to be here with you.
So
Great to be here.
Glad to have you. So one question I always like asking, as Tom knows, is why math assessment? Why did you decide to write a book about math assessment? And what do you hope to achieve in writing this book, and particularly the SNAP Solution?
Well, your intro gave us the absolute answer to that question, John. For me as an educator, math's always been an area that vexes us. And yet, when I look at my grandkids, when I look at kids in general, I think every kid loves mathematics. I think they're fascinated by it. I think we almost drive math out of them. And I think a lot of it is through our instructional design and delivery. The root cause of high school math failure didn't start in grade 9, 10, 11, or 12. It started in grade 1, 2, and 3. That was the driver. I was fortunate to work with my two co-authors are getting this opportunity to more practically apply the content that you're seeing in the SNAP solution. So I think they'd each like to contribute to this question as well.
Kirk and then Jonathan. How about that?
I think Tom hit the nail on the head with the larger, big idea why we wrote this book. This is probably 20 years in the making in terms of looking at teaching and assessing using proficiency and competencies as opposed to just rote math, and realizing that there was a gap there with where we were aspiring to be as an educational system and what we were actually doing. And bringing the thinking into math in a way that was doable and simple and clear enough for general educators to bring it into the elementary classrooms. And this is why we were so excited about SNAP and why we think it needs to get out there and why we ended up publishing this.
And just to tag on to that, there aren't, when we think back to when we went to school, I mean, the math test, the math quiz, and the level of anxiety it provoked. So we wanted to develop an assessment that was full of wonder, full of curiosity. Simply, it looks like a puzzle, and it invites students to come in and explore math. And it isn't provoking. It's meant to have numerous access points for students, early learners, all the way up to grade 8. Mm-hmm. And it's a window into thinking. And as Kirk was saying, we really wanted to promote thinking and wonder and see if we could do that. And we developed the one-page template called the SNAP.
I love that. I will in the show notes have an image, or maybe on the art have an image of what the snap actually looks like so our listeners could visualize it better. But yes, I agree with you. I think we need to do more with getting students doing the thinking in math. It starts by, you know, alienating our students from a very early age and having them fear math and having them find math abstract and not particularly relevant to the real world. So, developing a solution like SNAP, where you have students doing the thinking, where it is accessible for students and yet still allows teachers to assess student knowledge around standards, I believe is key. And so, with that said, gentlemen, you're talking about the SNAP solution, and you said that it has multiple access points. Can you take us through what the SNAP solution is, and perhaps how it differs from traditional math assessment?
I'll turn it over to two other gentlemen, but I just wanted to piggyback on what you had said. And to be fair to our colleagues, one of the challenges that happens in mathematics is because of this long-standing aversion to math. John, you could go to a social situation this evening with 40 other adults, and in that circle, you could say, I don't do math. And everybody would say, that's okay, John. I don't do math either. We'd be horrified if you said, I don't read. Right? As a result, we have now teachers in the elementary school. And if you ask them, and we talk about this in the book, if you ask them, what's your favorite thing to teach? It's going to be a while before they get to mathematics. As a result, the default is we're going to, teach math the way we were taught math because we don't have access to a tool that is as clear and as dirt simple as what we've provided here in the SNAP. And with that intro, I'm going to turn it over to Kirk and Jonathan.
So you talked about, taking you through the SNAP template and the unique features. I just wanted to tell a little story before we do that, connected to that real life application. In the past, this is one of the story that has really helped us on this journey. If you think about the multiplying negative numbers, so -2 times -4, we all know what the answer to that is, correct? +8. And then we ask, okay, so can you connect that to real life? What's a real life example of that? Or why is that the case? We've asked hundreds of educators this question, and we're all in the same boat. We were just taught that that was the rule. 2 negatives equal a positive. And we struggle to come up with a real life application. And when we talk about the understanding that the underlying concepts of the math we're teaching, and this is a simple grade 7 concept. This is the multiplying 2 negative numbers. And yet, to a person, folks can't come up with a real life. And if we're doing it right now in your own head, you're probably struggling. Hey, what would be a real life application? And that's why we have the SNAP. The multiple access points allows us to go deep into the math, and eventually we actually ask students, how would you use this number? How would you use this concept in a real life scenario? And it forces the teachers and the students to elevate their game to a new level that is not it's not unreasonable. Like, it's totally reasonable that you should be able to give a real life example for elementary math, and yet we can't. It's actually fascinating that we're sending spaceships to Mars, and yet in our grade schools we can't do this simple kind of piece. So we'll jump into the SNAP itself. Jonathan, you want to just give us an overview of that?
So looking at the template itself, we wanted to focus on number sense. So we know that there's a lot of different topics in numeracy, but we wanted to focus on number sense because we believe that it's a building block for all of numeracy. So that's why we're looking at number sense. So when we look at the template for a typical, for example, intermediate student, let's say 3rd grade, 4th grade, you place a number in the circle. And the number could be 234. And then students are asked to enter in and explain their thinking around what that number looks like. And they don't have to start any particular order. They can start where they like. For example, one of the places they could start is show the value of the number. Now they're going to draw it. and you ask students to draw, this is now fun. This is, oh, I can do this. Let's play with this. And there's many different ways to draw the number as opposed to just drawing the numerals. Draw a picture. What does it look like? And then we want them to describe that picture in brief words. And by the way, you asked the question a little bit earlier about traditional numeracy assessments. Maybe there are a number of word problems. Maybe there are a number of speed tests. This is not that. This is more of an exploration. And Kirk's thinking would be different from my thinking, would be different from Tom's thinking and yours in this. And that's the beauty of it. Another thing that we want them to do is show the number in expanded form. And then we want them to create 3 equations that equal the number. And then, as Kirk was saying, create a real life example that shows the value of the number. How many times have we heard this life? Where am I going to see this in real life? Well, we're asking them to do that, to explore where is math useful? How can I apply this? We also want them to count forwards and backwards by a certain number. And then we'd like to place that number 234 on a number line. And then finally, we're going to ask them to reflect. And this is the metacognitive piece. Think about your thinking. What was easy? What was hard? What am I going to do next time? So there's so much thinking involved in the template itself.
And then in the book, you also, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, you have another tool or template called the Annie. Is that right? Can you walk us through what the Annie is?
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned this has been a 20-year journey. So the Annie is SNAP 1.0 and SNAP is Annie 2.0, so to speak. The Annie focuses more on operations. Right now, this version of the SNAP is number sense. The Annie is the operations version. Very similar, but it's going to focus on division, subtraction, addition, multiplication. But the same idea, you're drawing a picture, you're explaining your picture, you're connecting that math to a real life scenario, basically creating your own word problem. So you have a metacognitive pieces, but this one is a number sense book. Good question.
By the way, would love to know where you came up with the name SNAP.
It is an acronym. It actually stands for Student Numeracy Assessment and Practice. And practice goes to that fluency piece you were talking about earlier, and also a spiraled curriculum. So the idea that we are going to continually come back and practice and build that procedural fluency so that students have that skill embedded in all their thinking. When they start thinking about math, they actually see the template sort of in their mind's eye and engage with numeracy in a more holistic way. It's that idea of templating on your brain. We've all heard the expression cells that wire together, fire together. It all kind of flows and the students are able to explain and connect their learning to those real life examples. It's multiplying. You teach a class, you give an example, and now you'd be surprised at how many folks can come up and students come up with their own examples of how that works out. That's the beauty of the SNAP, is that we're asking students to use their own background and their own culture, their own experiences to come up with how the math applies to them. We're not putting the education systems or the teachers' values or whatever it is, or a textbook example that doesn't make sense for students that are from different cultures. They don't speak the language very well. It's actually quite a culturally sensitive assessment. And so that's something that's been really helpful.
And the other thing too, just to connect onto that, you're asking about how to use it in the classroom. So we believe that we've created a unicorn because you can use this as assessment. So as assessment, when the students are doing the SNAP, either the whole template or maybe they're zooming into a certain area of it, they're becoming more proficient in that particular area of number sense. For assessment, if you're going to be giving either the template or part of it at the beginning of a unit, for example, or at the beginning of a month, you're going to determine where the students are. Where do you need to move them? Where do you need to teach them? Individually, small group, whole class. It gives you a lot of information to move the students. And it gives the students information about where they are as well. Finally, assessment at the end. So you can give them a number. Now they need to work through this independently to demonstrate where they are. So you can use it in 3 different ways.
First of all, you want to ensure that students have number sense when it comes to negative numbers. So the snap in our book, the number sense snap, a great way to do that is to actually put a negative number, -4 or something in the middle of that template. And then you work through that, right? So you might even start with the number line, right? How does that play out? Where are your origins? And have students work in that. Learning is a social construct too, right? It's so much more fun and engaging to work with a partner or work in a small group. We can zoom into aspects of the snap, and we might spend a lesson or two just on that zooming in aspect of the number line. How would we represent it in a drawing? How would we explain that? What are some equations that would equal? Where would we find -4 in real life? You bring in temperature or whatever, debt, those ideas, counting forwards and backwards. Once students have that understanding of what a negative number or what integers are and how that plays out, then you could introduce addition, subtraction, and then multiplication. That's where the operation snap, or AKA the Annie, would come in. That's where a lot of our teachers struggle. They miss those foundational pieces and jump to where they think they should be in the curriculum based on state standards or what comes next in the textbook. So the SNAP helps us ground our practice and feel confident in moving forward at an appropriate rate.
One of the things that attracted me when Kirk and Jonathan were first talking about this is that every kid's going to be successful at something. And now, so we're going to celebrate their success. And where's their growth opportunity? Somehow, as we move up through the grades, we've reduced math to the memorization of formulae. That's not math. That's the application of math. Math is really joy. It is fun. It is this thing that kids want to engage in. But we also beat math out of them by saying, you must know the quadratic formula. Okay, well, I can memorize a formula, but you know what happens 2 weeks after the test? I can't tell you a thing about it. There's no practical application, right? Why does Johnny cut across the field rather than walking along the edge and along the edge? Because he's done some math.
We wanted to bring back the curiosity and the wonder. And with that real life example, a particular story that was really profound to me when I was a school principal was there was a student in grade 5 who developed a real life example, and the number in the middle of the snap was large. It was something like 10,000. He was an aviation fan, and he was able to determine how many seats there were on a Boeing 777. And then he could relatively quickly determine how many planes would fit 10,000 people. So this assessment is low floor, high ceiling. For those students who just want to explore and create, and if they love aviation or whatever it is that their background is that they're bringing to the table, they get to celebrate that, and we get to bring back the curiosity and the wonder, because as Tom was talking about earlier, math can be anxiety provoking. There's one answer and get it quick, and there's only one way to do it. You cross off the 0, you put up the 9, and you just memorize and just do it. Well, we're talking about thinking here.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that example, Jonathan, because it more or less brings me to my next question, which is, in the work that you have all been doing in schools, how have you seen schools adopt the SNAP? And what have been some of the more interesting ways that you've seen schools use the SNAP? What has made you excited by what you've seen in terms of adoption of the SNAP solution?
We've been really excited about how teachers have engaged with their students with SNAP, and in a variety of ways, whether it's sidewalk chalk out on the outside making number lines, whether it's teachers doing their teacher version of where they complete the SNAP and with errors, and the students have to find their errors, whether it's working in partners, whether it's blowing and working together through it, whether it's blowing up the SNAP large, where groups of 4 kids gather around and work together. There's a lot of collaboration, whether it's creating clotheslines of number lines in the classroom where teachers will create an actual clothesline and then peg numbers along there, and then kids have to come up with real life examples of where those numbers fit in world. Super creative ideas that we find it inspiring. I think those are the positive stories around SNAP. There's also the piece where we in Chilliwack use this as a district assessment. So there's also a piece where there's a little bit of accountability, and we've asked for teachers to do this and then submit their students' performance in a summative assessment kind of way in the spring. And I think that anytime that you create something that is top-down initiative or do something as a top-down initiative, it can lose some of its luster. So we do, to be fair, we do have some educators who are like, I will do this as a compliance piece, and they don't lean into the joy and into the spiraling piece and into the fact that this actually makes your life a lot easier. And in those scenarios, it's not as effective.
And you talked about so much there, Kirk, that we're going to loop back to. So hopefully I won't forget to loop back to implementation. We also need to loop back in terms of what the districts that did use the SNAP as a summative assessment, what they found out that might be similar or different to what they have found out in terms of the normal data that they've looked at. Those are definitely two things we need to return to. Jonathan and Tom, how about you? What are some examples of the joy? Kirk was mentioning that when people buy into it, there's joy. So, what has been some of the joy that you've seen in schools using the SNAPs?
Jonathan, you just had a chance to work with a group not too long ago. Share some of the highlights of that work you got to do.
So I was in northern Alberta, and we were exploring the SNAP in a variety of different middle schools. And we did a clothesline activity. Kirk was talking about this, and we had choose a number and put it on the number line. And we had students come up and put the number on the number line. And some of the numbers that they came up with were just like infinity and or really small numbers. So we asked them to put it up on the number line, and we had them stop and say, okay, if you were putting infinity, where would you stop? Would you just keep going? Would you be going down to Calgary or Edmonton, wherever it is you're standing? And it was just so interesting because the students were engaged. It was vertical math. They were thinking. They all got to take part. They all got to take a chance. Another thing that I'm connecting with is when we were first developing the SNAP, it was for grades 2 to 8. And there were some teachers in the school that I worked in, kindergarten and grade 1, and they said, okay, we're seeing this really powerful assessment happening. We're seeing students start to think in different ways about numeracy. Can we develop one ourselves? So we started to develop the kindergarten and grade 1 SNAP. And then other districts beside us were saying, can we get this too? Because there really isn't anything like this out there. I see students excited and engaged. There are 2 teachers in a neighboring school, and they've actually written on their windows. They have students who will go up and write on the windows the different aspects of SNAP. And then another teacher has created a variety of different templates because we know that the brain likes novelty. It's a way of promoting novelty and getting students to think about math and stay curious and developing that rich thinking around numeracy. Joy, curiosity, and thinking.
I think the big piece is the joy, right? To walk into a class where kids are actively engaged in math like I haven't seen before, because there is an entry point for every kid, because it doesn't seem like it's about rote memorization, that it's not so structured. The curiosity that exists. One of the examples I gave was asking a kid how they figured out what 1/3 of 12 was, because the kid immediately said 4. And I was impressed. So when I asked the kid, how'd you do that? He said, oh, those are really easy. I added the 1 and the 3. And that's the joy of math, is that sometimes you can get the right answer the wrong way. Now, our instruction shouldn't be to shut that kid down right away and say, what are you talking about? Everybody knows when you say 1/3 of 12 in math, of means to multiply 1/3 times 12 over 1. No, let's explore. Wow, that is a brilliant way to get these solved. I wonder if it works all the time. Let's try 2/3 of 12. What do you get as the answer? It's 5. Darn, it doesn't work all the time. Here's the thing. 2/3 of 12 is actually 8. Now, John was just up here working on the same problem. Why don't the two of you, knowing that 1/3 of 12 is indeed 4 and that 2/3 is 8, how do you think? That's what we want to see in math instruction. This is the ticket. This is the tool that opens up math to that wonder, to that joy, to kids saying, I want to be in that class, rather than, God, I've been sentenced to 13 years of math. What did I do wrong?
Indeed. So now you were all talking about this K1 version. How does the K1 version of SNAP differ from the 2.8 version?
We're asking students to do less, and often it's done as a whole class. You can still put the number in the middle, and now build the number with one or two, more or less. And can you represent and subitize the number in three ways? Can you look at it and just identify that? And we're talking about the number 3 or 4 or 5. Can you decompose the number in three ways? How can you take it apart and put it back together? And then looking at benchmarks of 5 and 10, and then putting that number on a number path, a group of 5, two groups of 5, groups of 10. So it's a simplified version, but it really gets students thinking and exploring, and right away they're able to look at a number and think about that number in different ways. And I know that I'm challenged to do that because I wasn't taught this way. I was taught that there's just one number, but to get me to think about this, to be honest, I'd be in a different place today if I was taught this way, because I wasn't taught necessarily how to think about number this way. We're asking students to think about number this way, and to be brave and courageous with it, and to say, oh, it looks like this, and it looks like that, and it looks like this, to be nimble and flexible. And that's what we're trying to do.
I wish I was taught this way too. Speaking of the data piece, going back to that, Kirk, you were talking about some districts using it as a summative assessment and teachers sitting down and analyzing the data. Can you walk us through some of the ways that you've seen teachers use the SNAP as a data piece and as a data collection tool?
There's a lot there, John. It works great as a formative assessment, and as in a classroom, creating classroom profiles. So, for instance, a teacher gives the assessment prior to a unit, sees where the students fall out, realizes that there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 groupings of students, depending on what the results were. And there's themes. There's like, okay, we need to do whole group instruction around a real life application because everybody's struggling with that. But then, hey, look, a lot of kids are okay on, say, the number line, but there's a group that needs help. So that's a small group. And then there's really only a couple of kids that are really struggling with all of it. And those are going to be your one-on-one kind of, or very small group interventions. And then you can also come back. Then you do another one. Instead of having 6 groups, now we have 3 groups because more kids are getting it. And then eventually you get to a place where hopefully all the kids are proficient. That's now your summative piece so that you can now report out on. So that's where we've seen a lot of success at the classroom teacher level. Once they get to that summative piece, we have 2 outcomes that we ask for per grade as a district. So we ask for a number sense outcome and we ask for an operations outcome. So on the number sense side of things, grade 2 is 0 to 100. Grade 3 is 0 to 1,000. So basically the teacher should be ideally doing that work year round, but then by the spring, they select a number that they think is appropriate and then they report out on it. So if the student shows that they were proficient on, 576 as an example in December, and they were fully proficient on it, that's fine. They don't need to continue to go back to assess that if the student is there. So they can report that out in June that the student was proficient on an assessment they did in December. But those kids that aren't proficient will need more time and they keep coming back to it. So that's how it works as our district data. So the whole idea with this is that this had to work for classroom teachers first. We piloted it and ensured that this was something that would work for them first. And then the district can also use that data. But we want it to be the teachers' data that they're sharing with us, and for the most part, it works really well.
And Kirk, you again led right into my next question, which is that implementation piece. So what worked for you? And I mean, you were already talking about really putting the power in the hands of the teachers to use it the way they wanted to use it as a tool, or not, as a way to actually get it implemented, because other teachers then saw the power of those using the SNAP solution. But if you could give advice to, say, a district, now you are a sitting superintendent you're using SNAP in your district, what would be some of the advice, in addition to creating it or writing the book? What advice would you give other school systems for implementing a tool like this?
And I think all three of us can probably give some good advice there.
Sure.
But off the top of my head, creating professional PLCs, professional learning communities, so you have a partner looking at the data together, looking at where students are co-creating strategies to help. We have a numeracy teachers in our district that go around and coach. So we actually have numeracy coaches, and that's a really helpful piece where they go and they sit side by side with classroom teachers and help them analyze their data and support them where kids are struggling. The power with this is when you see the results. It works. So it does sell itself. It's like, oh, this actually makes teaching and learning accessible for me as a math phobe. I can actually do this and feel like I have efficacy as a teacher. I can see my students improving. I can send it home, and parents who have questions, they get it and they understand. It does gather momentum. So I think that the proof is in the pudding. And so when you come into the implementation stage, you definitely need to support it, but you have to celebrate and see the changes. And I think it sells itself that way.
Definitely, formal leadership needs to be in place from all levels. My lens was from a principal. So supporting that with the staff, giving them time. I would take students into the gym while the teachers would collaborate and plan. So once you do the assessment, it's like, what's next? So we know that our students are struggling with a number line. So how are we going to teach that concept and in a way that actually helps them understand that? One of the best ways to do that is through a PLC, through team time. It's allowing teachers to collaborate and work on that, and what strategies work for you and what strategies work for me, and how can we work together. So definitely school-based leadership is super important to provide the time and the support for it to happen. And then the results, as Kirk was saying, you celebrate those results and you allow for that exploration time to take place, and know that change takes time, and you're looking at it that way.
In terms of a PLC, what I'm thinking about is how educators could use the SNAP as the student work and then engaging in an atlas protocol. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? To get to those questions about, okay, our kids do need help, quote unquote, with a number line. How are we going to do that? Let's implement whatever that is, and then come back with that student work to see if we've actually had progress.
Exactly. And when you're using a common assessment, which is what RTI and PLCs talk about, so powerful that way.
Right? And bear in mind, we had talked about a little bit earlier. So if I'm someone who's feeling a little bit uncomfortable already about my expertise, about my ability to teach mathematics, my fallback is to teach it the way I was taught.
Mhm.
Right? So now intuitively, I understand this might be a better tool, but I'm not really comfortable with, even though we think it's foundational and pretty simple to use. So, what are we doing as both leadership at the school level and then at the district level to encourage that development? What are we doing to walk the adults through this and have them play with and experience the simplicity of the tool? That's a critical piece, because you're asking people who don't necessarily want to own the fact that they're not so good at math to get better at teaching math. We've got to be willing to embrace that, and not in a way that has people feeling lesser than.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Tom. Can you think of an example of how a school system did lead teachers through that pre-work, getting them on board with the SNAP tool?
Kirk, you could probably walk through from moment one. And again, even though it's been housed there and created there, we would be disingenuous if we said the minute it was announced, everybody
Right.
said, wow, I can't wait.
It actually landed with a fair bit of excitement when we first rolled it out, because it replaced another assessment that teachers didn't like and that wasn't actually meeting the mark. It replaced an assessment that was algorithm heavy and had a lot of multiple choice answers and then word problems. So and the SNAP came, and it was created by teachers. So the initial rollout was one where it was actually pretty heralded, I think, from a district rollout standpoint. Like I mentioned, we had some helping teachers that went out and helped train people and create efficacy. We all agree that it's a really positive tool, but it takes ongoing training, because Even our teacher education programs, this is not embedded there. Everybody's still teaching the way they were always taught. And so it continues to be a deficit problem in our system nationally and North American wide and probably worldwide. Teaching math this way has taken a lot longer to do than I originally thought. This has been a 20-year journey. We're still having these conversations, but now I've realized that learning takes patience and time. And for us to really impact the system and how we're probably another 20 years away.
What have we not talked about?
There's one more piece in terms of the fact that the SNAP is grounded in the 5 strands of mathematical proficiency. And this is developed by the National Research Council in 2001, where they talk about conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, strategic competence, adaptive reasoning, and productive disposition. All of those elements are found within the SNAP. So yes, we've created it in Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada, but the fact is that with these 5 strands of mathematical proficiency, this can be used anywhere, and teachers can be confident in the fact that it's addressing important concepts in numeracy that was developed with this research council in 2001.
Jonathan mentioned earlier the low floor, high ceiling piece. We didn't really talk a lot about how we can push kids to really push their thinking beyond where they thought they could be. So a student might complete the SNAP with this student, they have the big idea, they're proficient, but there's still places in each one of the areas where you can ask a student to push their thinking a little bit more. How else might you further refine your number line? What else could you do? What's another real life example that is maybe a little bit more connected to something you're learning in another subject area? There's all these amazing places where you can push student thinking in a really exciting way.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Kirk, because I'm thinking you could even do a gallery walk with the SNAP tool and have students giving feedback to other students about their SNAP tool. How do we get our students pushing other students thinking? There is that social emotional learning growth mindset aspect that could also be enhanced in learning math in this way.
I just, my colleague Jonathan just kicked me under the table because he wanted me to highlight one other thing that we'd forgotten. You don't need a high degree of literacy skill in order to access the SNAP assessment and to show what you know in math. So many of our math assessments out there require students to be able to read. You have to read the word problem. You have to understand the context. You have to infer the other meanings. You have to do all of those pieces. The SNAP, you bring your own background, your own language. It can be done orally with a teacher. So it really assesses math and not reading, which is actually a very unique feature that we're proud of.
And an important one, particularly in school systems with large multilingual learning populations.
Yeah.
Tom, how about you?
For me, it's really at a very basic level and probably a little bit selfish. I want to see the love that my grandkids demonstrate early for mathematics continue all the way through their high school. I want them to understand the practical applications and how significant math is in their everyday life and how much fun it genuinely can be. I don't want to continue this system that we have that beats math out of kids and makes it an aversion rather than a joyous experience.
Where can people find out more information about you and the work that you do?
My website's probably the easiest place, just tomhierck.com. Any of the social media, first name, last name, you'll find me there.
Great. Jonathan, how about you?
So they can reach out to me by email, jonathanferris40@gmail.com.
Kirk, how can people find you?
Well, I'm easy to find on savagebirdlearning.com. So if you go to savagebirdlearning.com, you'll find my contact information there.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much for your time. I hope folks listening to the podcast integrate the SNAP tool into their work with students around numeracy, because as we've been talking about in the last 40 minutes, it really gets at the heart of making learning more accessible for students.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching, without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.